Welcome to English Stories with Subhan. Don't forget to like and subscribe. My office gave me a 1-month holiday, and I decided to visit my hometown to see my mother. This time, she seemed more excited than usual, which made me wonder why. I thought maybe she missed me a lot. At 8 o'clock, my train arrived at the station. I felt both tired and happy as I took a taxi and headed straight to my home. When I reached home, I knocked on the door, and it opened. Standing there was my lovely mother, with a big smile on her face. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "My dear son, you are finally home." Her voice was full of love and happiness. I couldn't stop myself. I hugged her tightly. I felt her warmth, and it made me realize how much she had missed me. Her face was emotional, and I could see how much my visit meant to her. We went to the living room, and I sat down on the sofa. My legs were tired from the long journey, and I leaned back to rest. "Mom, can you please bring me a glass of water?" I asked gently. I felt a mix of exhaustion and comfort, knowing I was finally home, but my mother didn't bring the water. Instead, she sat beside me with a strange smile on her face. "Your water is coming," she said softly, still smiling. I looked at her, confused, wondering what was going on. Just then, a young woman, about 22 years old, walked into the room. She was beautiful but looked nervous. She held a glass of water in her hands and brought it to me. Her hands shook a little as she gave it to me, and her shy eyes didn't meet mine. I could tell she was feeling uncomfortable. I took the glass and said kindly, "Thank you." She nodded and quickly stepped back. My mother's eyes sparkled as she looked at the young woman. There was something special in the way she was watching her. Then my mother said with excitement, "Peter, meet Lucy, our new house helper." I smiled at the young lady and said, "Okay, welcome, Lucy." "Thank you, sir," she replied in a quiet voice. Suddenly, my mother shouted, "No, no, no. Don't call him sir." Her voice was loud, but her tone was playful. Lucy froze for a moment, unsure of what to say next, while I looked at my mother, surprised and a little amused. "She has a nice name, Peter." "Just call him Peter, and I will be very happy," my mother said with a cheerful tone. "Yes, please call me Peter," I said again, smiling warmly at Lucy. After that, we went to the dining table to have dinner. The food smelled delicious, and I could feel my hunger growing. Lucy quietly went to the kitchen to do some work, and my mother leaned closer to me and whispered, "Lucy is going to stay with us. Poor girl lost her parents last week, and she has no one to take care of her." I was shocked to hear this. My heart felt heavy as I thought about the pain Lucy must have gone through. My mother continued, "The poor child doesn't even have a home because they were living in a rented house. After her parents passed away, she had nowhere to go. So, I decided to help her in my own way. I was already looking for a maid, and this felt like the right thing to do." I looked at my mother with respect. "My dear mother, you did the best thing," I said. "But you know her well, right? You understand how youngsters are nowadays, and having a complete stranger in our house." Before I could finish, my mother interrupted me firmly. "No, she is not a stranger. I know her family well. She's a good girl, Peter," she said, her voice full of confidence. I nodded, trusting my mother's judgment, but deep down, I felt curious about Lucy's story and how her life had brought her to our home. After our conversation ended, I went to bed. My mind was still thinking about Lucy and everything my mother had said. The next morning, I got dressed and went to the breakfast table. To my surprise, Lucy and my mom had prepared my favorite breakfast. The table was filled with delicious food, and the smell made my mouth water. My mother sat down with me, but Lucy stood nearby, looking shy and unsure of what to do. "Come, Lucy, let's have breakfast together," my mother said warmly. "Yes, join us, Lucy," I added with a smile. She hesitated for a moment but then sat down beside me. For the first time, I took a proper look at her. Her blue eyes caught my attention, they were just like mine. I felt something strange, almost like a connection between us. As we ate, my mother suddenly said, "Peter, I was thinking about going to the market to buy some clothes for Lucy. But you know, I'm really tired today. Can you go with her instead?" I looked at her, a bit surprised. "Yes, I can go with Lucy," I said hesitantly, wondering why she wanted me to do this. "Lovely," my mother replied, looking pleased. "You both can spend some time together." I didn't understand why my mother seemed so happy about this. I began to suspect she had some hidden intentions. Lucy and I headed to the market. At first, it was a little awkward, but as we started looking at clothes, things became easier. She picked out a few dresses, and I even helped her choose some. I noticed how our tastes were similar. After shopping, we went to a coffee shop nearby. We sat down, and for the first time, we had a real conversation. We talked about life, about little things, and I started to see how kind and sweet Lucy was. For some reason, being with her felt easy and natural, like I had known her for a long time. Lucy and I spent the evening talking, and she shared her life story with me. I also told her about mine, and I felt really happy talking to her. We connected in a way I hadn't expected. Around 6 p.m., we returned home. I thought my mother might be upset that we had spent so much time together. But when we walked in, she looked happy and even suggested, "Peter, why don't you take Lucy to the park tomorrow?" I was surprised. I could sense there was something going on in my mother's mind, but I wasn't sure what it was. Later, I asked my mother, "Mom, can you please explain what you want? I've noticed you've been acting a little strange lately. Why do you want me to spend so much time with Lucy? What's really going on?" My mother looked at me and said, "I know what you're thinking, Peter, but please believe me. I really care about Lucy. I don't want to treat her like just a maid. I want her to feel like she's part of our family." I didn't say anything after that. It was clear now, my mother wanted Lucy to be a part of our family. And the only way that could happen was if she became my wife. To thank me, Lucy baked my favorite cake. After we enjoyed it, we went to the terrace, where we shared a quiet, special moment. We laughed, talked, and for a moment, our eyes met in silence. She looked so beautiful in the soft light of the moon. I held her hand, and she smiled at me. It felt like the perfect night. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts were full of Lucy. From the first day I met her, I had felt a special bond, and now I knew it was love. I needed to tell my mother and Lucy how I felt. My mother would be so happy, since this is what she had been hoping for all along. The next morning, I went to buy a ring for Lucy. I made special arrangements in the backyard, decorating it with lights and flowers. My mother had no idea what I was planning. I thought I'd tell her later. That evening, I took Lucy to the backyard. She was surprised and happy to see the decorations. I got down on one knee, took out the ring, and asked her to marry me. Her face lit up, and tears filled her eyes. "Yes. Yes. Yes," she screamed in joy, just as I was putting the ring on Lucy's finger, my mother came into the yard. She saw the ring and Lucy standing in front of me, and she shouted, "What is all this? What are you doing, Peter?" my mother shouted when she saw me proposing to Lucy. I laughed and said, "I'm going to marry Lucy, my first love. And this is what you wanted me to do?" "Believe me, mother, I am the happiest man today." My mother's face went red with anger. "What nonsense! You can't marry her. Are you both out of your senses?" she screamed. Before I could say anything, my mother fainted. I was shocked, and Lucy was too. We didn't know what to do. I quickly called the doctor. After the checkup, the doctor said my mother had a panic attack and advised me not to give her any stress. When my mother woke up, I went into her room. Lucy was too scared to come with me. "Mom, are you feeling better now?" I asked softly. "Yes, my son," she replied weakly. I was still confused about what had happened. "But Mom, why did you react that way? You were the one who wanted me to be close to Lucy. Now your reaction is so strange." My mother looked at me sadly. "Look, Peter, I know I asked you to spend time with Lucy, but I never wanted you to marry her. And I will never give you permission for that. Forget all your feelings for Lucy." I felt my heart breaking. "No, not at all. I love Lucy with all my heart. She is my first love, and she loves me too. You even liked her so much. So why are you against this? Please, Mom, understand me." But she didn't answer. She just closed her eyes and went to sleep. The next day, when I returned from the market, I saw some guests in the house. A young, pretty woman and an older lady were sitting with my mother. I greeted them and sat beside my mother, still feeling confused. My mother smiled and said, "Look, Peter, this is my friend's daughter, Alex. Isn't she beautiful? I've selected her to be my daughter-in-law." "What?" I shouted in shock. "No, this can't happen." I turned to the ladies and asked them to leave immediately. My mother was very angry. "How could you be so disrespectful to our guests?" she scolded me. "But, Mom, how could you even think of marrying me to someone else?" I said, my voice full of hurt. "You know I love Lucy." My mother's face grew stern. "But I've already told you, you can't love Lucy," she replied coldly. "Why? Please, Mom, give me a reason. Can't you see the pain in my eyes?" I begged, feeling my heart breaking again. I was filled with anger as my mother's words sank in. "You have to give me a reason, or I will take Lucy and get married without you." I shouted, frustrated. My mother started to cry, her voice shaking as she spoke. "Peter, my son, I love you so much. I cannot lose you. I don't want you to hate me. If you want to know the reason, then wait for my death." Her words hit me like a blow. In my rage, I said something awful. "Then die, Mom." I immediately regretted those words as soon as they left my mouth. But it was too late. From that day on, I stopped talking to her. I was angry, and she became weaker and weaker each day. She was always sick, and the months dragged on with no change. Then, my mother arranged for Lucy to marry someone else. I tried to stop the wedding, but when Lucy saw how badly my mother was, she decided to leave the house and marry. My mother cried every day. The doctor said she only had a few days left. One day, as I returned home, I noticed a group of people gathered outside my house. My heart skipped a beat. One man came forward and told me that my mother had passed away. I rushed inside, my mind in a daze, to see her. I felt like everything had shattered. It was the worst day of my life. The day after my mother's death, I went into her room. On the desk, I saw a letter with my name on it. It was written by my mother. With trembling hands, I began to read it. Peter, the letter began. I know you hate me, but I couldn't tell you the truth. If you knew, you would hate me even more. I didn't hate Lucy. In fact, I loved her like a daughter. I wanted you to treat her like a sister, not a lover. But now, it's time for you to know the truth. Please, don't hate me after reading this. I was against your marriage to Lucy because she is your real sister. You have a blood relation with her. I adopted you from a very poor family. I am not your real mother, but I loved you as my own. When Lucy's parents died, I decided to take her in. But that was a mistake. Whatever happened is my fault, and I am sorry, my son. Please forgive me, don't hate me because I will continue to love you even after I die. As I finished reading the letter, I couldn't believe it. What had I done? What was my mistake? My mind was spinning with confusion, and my heart ached with regret.